shrine name sing for the king.
The game is yours to play now.
The light provides.
This is Eventide Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Eventide Radio. This is a fan-made Destiny podcast where we have roundtable discussions about a variety of different topics concerning the popular video game franchise. At its core, this show is about having in-depth discussions about the game from a variety of different perspectives. I'm your host, Scotty, and with me is my co-host, Rob, and today we are going to be talking about Spire of the Watcher, the new dungeon that came out, because we still haven't really talked about it, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Revision Zero near the end. So, Rob, to get us started, what is your personal opinion on the current state of the season?
This season as a whole has been pretty good in terms of like story elements, and I know we talked about this over the last time, but the season as it's kind of winding down, there's still some kind of like event for the last 2 weeks, so we don't know what it is that hypothetically will wrap up the story and then transition to Nightfall in some capacity. I'm excited for that. This season has had some pretty good story beats. It did kind of the classic thing where I feel like it front loaded a lot of the stuff at the beginning, and I wish that it had just kind of parsed it out a little bit more throughout the season. Because I notice a lot of people, like in my clan specifically, they play a bunch at the beginning of the season and then they're already kind of burned out by the time you get to like GM Nightfalls. And some come back, but then some don't. And they're just kind of like, well, I'll see you next season. And I don't necessarily know if slowing out, like, again, kind of pacing out the rate at which the story elements come out rather than every week you have it every other week or something like that. I don't know if that would solve the problem because those people might just burn out regardless of story beats and wouldn't maybe even care to finish the story because they did everything they wanted to do at the beginning of the season, or I don't know. But it just like, okay, we got a bunch of stuff at the beginning and then now the last couple weeks there hasn't been any new story stuff. And we're just kind of like running through like GMs and there's plenty of stuff to do. Like this week, Iron Banner is going on, and I think this story or this season has been pretty good. And I think the dungeon, we didn't really talk about the dungeon a whole lot. I think the dungeon's pretty rad. It does the here's a gimmick or mechanic or thing, and then it kind of carries throughout the entire dungeon, and there's little twists on it at certain counters. That's all nothing new. I think the mechanic itself is kind of interesting. I think the final boss is not great, but everything else is pretty cool. I've had a hell of a time trying to get some of the loot from it, even though it is like farmable beyond belief, and I've just had really bad luck. But that's nothing out of the ordinary. But I think that the dungeon's pretty cool, and the story behind it's kind of neat, and it's more kind of Warmind lore and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that's true. So I'll play devil's advocate. So I'm not going to try to I'm not trying to stop you from enjoying this. There's nothing wrong with enjoying it. I'm just so tired of this trend where they're like, let's take one mechanic and just copy and paste that throughout the entire thing. I don't understand this trend because I just think it's so boring, especially when the mechanic itself is just tedious. And you'll go from one encounter to the next, and then the only thing that'll change is like do more of it. And it's, I don't know, it gets a little old. It's the same problem as Grasp of Avarice, in my opinion. But at least this one doesn't have the stupid
bomb part in the middle.
Yeah, that was egregious. But still my same like fundamental issue is just the copy and paste the same mechanic. I don't like that format, personally.
No, and I also fundamentally agree with you because by the time you get to the final... I think in this particular dungeon, the way the mechanic is handled with respect to the boss, I don't like it. Like I farmed the boss a couple weeks ago with some clanmates because one of them, why did we do it? One of them wanted something, and I was like, well, I still need the scout rifle, and I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll run it. We did probably close to 10 or so completions of the boss, and I didn't get the scout rifle, and I'm bitter about that because it's double drops, and like you think statistically I would have gotten it. Anyway, neither here nor there. But that tedious part that you're talking about, which I completely agree, is exacerbated by the way the that room is laid out. And I think it's just there's too many enemies kind of going on with and for those of you who don't know, spoilers, if you haven't played the dungeon yet, like it's out long enough that I don't feel bad about this. But basically, there's a buff that you get from minotaurs called Arctrician, which is kind of clever. And you basically have to shoot nodes that are opened up in kind of the order that they're in kind of a linear path, and you have to, one of them starts off, and that's like the power source, and as you shoot them, it sends the charge further and further, and you complete the circuit by shooting all of the nodes in the order. And the kind of the gimmick to that is all the wires and cables that you have to follow are like loosely draped all over the place, which I kind of have a more meta problem with, because it's like, here you have this like golden age Spire that's like advanced engineering, and then you just have like the worst cable management ever. So that always kind of bothered me. I'm like, why are there cables draped all over the place, but the rest of the thing looks so professionally done? But anyway, so with that in mind, with the cables kind of loosely draped all over the place, you have to kind of, unless you like, if you do it enough, you probably eventually will memorize where all of them are, and this kind of takes it out of it. But when you're first trying to learn, you're trying to follow the cables, and so your camera's like pointing down, so you can like follow it, because sometimes it drapes up into the ceiling and then wraps around something and then goes down and it crosses with another cable, and sometimes it's like kind of underneath part of the bridge, so you have to jump to another platform so you can kind of see it from a better angle. And that's all well and good. You do have the Arctrician buff for like 35 or 40 seconds, and if you shoot it, it extends it by like 5 or 10 seconds or something. So as long as you keep shooting nodes, you keep the buff going. So there's a little bit of like a time element to it, but with where all the nodes are with relation to each other, it's not that bad in terms of like, it's not like you're just barely getting it in every time and you have to like, but when you're trying to first learn where everything is, there's so many enemies that bombard you. And on top of that, it's a lot of Vex that explode. And I'm blanking on the harpies that
Supplicants, I think.
Supplicants, thank you. Yeah, that's from like Vogue, old school.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember the name, but there's supplicants constantly dashing at you, blowing up, and sometimes multiple of them at a time. And you've got hobgoblins, and then the minotaurs spawn periodically as well. And so there's just, and then on top of that, the boss is a giant, effectively,
Which boss are you talking
wyvern.
about?
The final boss.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's like, it's the same boss from Garden of Salvation, the final boss, which some people had complaints about that, and I don't really care if they recycle a design boss, because it's supposed to be the particular Vex from the Black Garden. So like from an aesthetic standpoint, it makes sense that there'd be another one that kind of looks like a giant chicken wyvern thing. Like whatever,
Sure.
that's fine. And that never bothers me. Like we've been reusing bosses literally since day one of D1, so who cares?
Me neither. As long as it's not like gameplay, like copy and paste, then
right.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with it. Also, it's a dungeon, so it's like
exactly. So it's tedious and it's frustrating when you're trying to follow the path, and then a supplicant comes and just blows you up and kills you. And then once you get res, then you have to go find the Minotaur again and revive yourself. And I know the whole thing is like, well, then just don't die and, do better management of killing enemies and not, but it just kind of sucks the fun out of it when you're trying to learn the locations and you're constantly doing this juggling act that just feels very tedious, and like it just feels like too much. And it gets a little old after a while. And by the time after the 10th or so run that I was farming it, I was pretty confident where all the nodes were, and I could do it a lot more efficiently. But it wasn't fun to learn, like some of the other dungeons and encounters have been in other endgame things. So it's just like, it's definitely down there in terms of like boss mechanics.
Okay.
And you can, and again, once you get it down, you can do it pretty quickly. We were consistently like 2-phasing it. The boss and we had a good like kind of farming sequence down, and it was fun, like doing kind of a clan night sort of thing. But when it came time for learning it, I think we compared to like Duality, which is the other dungeon that we got this year. That one, it's a lot more like out in the open. again, you're still going back to what you were saying, the whole where you're just iterating on the same mechanic over and over again. I will still kind of voice my frustration with duality, where in that you have to shoot the bell to stop her and extend the the mechanic, which goes against what you've been doing the entire dungeon. So I would say that that's also bad design, where it's like, oh, we're going to change it up, but it's like, but this whole time you've been learning that you're not supposed to shoot the bell, because it takes you back, and then it doesn't do that anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, so I've always kind of had a problem with duality for that reason, but with this, uh yeah, it's not fun to learn, and it feels tedious even once you have it down. It's still like there's times where you just too many supplicants bombard you, or the boss who's walking around the room kind of chasing after you. He's pretty vicious and does quite a bit of damage. And there was a lot of times where I died and I just was like, this is frustrating.
Yeah.
So it's not the best dungeon. It's pretty good. Um, I think my biggest gripe, and this is probably going to be a lot of hate from it. I'm not big on the Tex Mechanica aesthetic.
Oh, the whole cowboy yeehaw
Yeah, like I think the
fedora.
weapons,
Yeah.
yeah, the weapons are cool, but adding cowboy hats to all the characters, I don't like it. And
I
in
get that.
fact, I don't want to say I hate it, but like I have like every piece of armor that I've gotten from that I've deleted. I haven't transmogged anything from it.
Yeah.
Like I don't care for it. It doesn't do
It's
anything for me.
it starts crossing over into that like suspension of disbelief
Yes.
meta territory where it's like, does this really fit with the aesthetic? And they're like deliberately going against like the canon of like the story, I guess, in a
Yeah.
sense. Like that doesn't like no other character in Destiny wears a cowboy hat.
Right.
And I understand how that could like, I don't know, throw some people off, kind of like breaks your immersion a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's like that one Eververse set where the hunter has like slacks and a sweater.
Oh yeah,
And
that was
like
the 30th anniversary.
yeah, and every time I see it, I just hate. Well, no, the 30th anniversary is the snowboard pants and hoodie, which is
Oh,
also bad, and the
oh, I
beanie.
know what you're talking about now. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was like a
yeah,
year or so before.
yeah. All those types of armor designs bother me so much, and I have this sounds like I'm just like pissing on the game right now, and I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to be
No,
negative.
yeah, yeah.
But I just yeah, the some of the aesthetic choices that have been made with the designs, like it's gotten real, like you said, it's kind of that immersion breaking. And I know it's like space magic and whatever. You take cloth and it can be defensive armor against you know demonic entities that have traveled across space and time to take out a giant white golf ball in the sky. Like, however you want to interpret the whole world of Destiny is kind of up to you. But yeah, seeing like slacks or cowboy hats, it's just like, what is happening?
Yeah, where's it rank for you?
Mm, I knew you were gonna ask that.
I love asking ranking questions.
I know. I know you're probably gonna roll your eyes. I think I still like Grasp like the most.
Most out of all of them?
Because I think it's an excellent it's a wonderfully designed dungeon for teaching dungeons and end game.
Yeah,
And when I was like playing with my neighbor
'cause
and
it's easy.
it's easy to teach, and they had a blast because it was the first time that they'd ever done anything like end game before. And they got like Galahorn, and that was like they were so excited about that. And I think I have I had the most fun doing that in a dungeon than I've had in a very, very long time doing any other dungeon.
Okay,
Uh, so but I almost want to like I have to
can't
like
argue with that.
ignore
I mean, that's
yeah, but I
valid.
also have to ignore that in terms of like in terms of ranking, because I think it's definitely objectively not the best one. But then I look at like every dungeon and I have some kind of problem with every single one of them.
Yeah,
And like I I play them to either get like a specific weapon or uh for pinnacles, but I don't like I'm not like I'll get excited if someone wants to do like a King's Fall or Vow of the Disciple, even though I've already done everything in there and I've gotten everything. Like I'll still do that dungeon because I enjoy or raid because I do it. Like the dungeons, I don't have that same urge uh unless there's something that I explicitly am trying to get out of it. Like the only reason I farmed the hell out of duality is because I wanted to get the Epicurean and fixed odds red borders completed. But like
Mhm.
I don't really like any of the other weapons from that. I just really like Epicurean and fixed odds. I think they're both really cool weapons, and I wanted to be able to craft them. So
Mhm.
I farmed the hell out of them so I could get that. But I didn't enjoy playing duality for like hours on end. It wasn't like that dungeon. I don't know. Like
Think on it. Think on it.
I know, but it's like I'm thinking like Pit of Heresy I like kind of, but then like I don't like the ogre maze. And
Okay. Okay.
what's the first dungeon? Um
Shattered Throne.
Shattered Throne. I can never
The
remember the
opening
name.
encounter is
I don't like the
always
opening encounter, and
just boring.
I get annoyed. Well, I don't hate. I just get annoyed by the ogre boss when you're trying to run around him and he's just blasting you with the eye thing, and it doesn't hurt you, but it just like I have no movement because it's just blasting me against the wall. I don't know. I find that so like irritating. But I like Duel and Karu. I think that's one of the more interesting final boss encounters. Um, and so then there's Pit of Heresy, and then Duality. I feel like the mechanics are jank in that, and I don't enjoy the you have to like stand in darkness. And I know you're supposed to pay attention to like around your screen if you're in the dark or light.
Oh, Prophecy, you mean?
Or I'm sorry, prophecy, not duality. In
Yeah.
prophecy, there's times where I feel like it's just kind of jank and doesn't work, and I've never really cared for the weapons or the armor from that. So like, and I hate Rainbow Road. Like that's the thing about prophecy that I'm not a fan of. Rainbow Road is so tedious, and the 45-second cooldown timer does not need to exist. That like, I don't like that dungeon. And then there's Grasp of Avarice, and that middle encounter with the bomb is sucky, but I really like the Sparrow part of that. And then,
Me too. I actually
uh, yeah,
I will
yeah,
confess that much at least.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess you're. I mean, they're all like good and bad for their own different
right,
reasons. For myself, I would say I think Pit of Heresy is my favorite. I
yeah,
think overall, I understand not liking the ogre encounter, but I just for example, I would take the ogre encounter any day over the stupid bomb thing in Grasp.
yeah,
Um,
fair,
I mean, there are much better gimmick encounters in the other dungeons, like
sure,
Prophecies and Grasps, like Sparrow sections. I think are fun, despite the timer and Prophecy. I still think they're pretty cool. But I don't know. I like Pit of Heresy. I think most in part because it follows the raid layer structure, which was first encounter was like a mechanic, then the next encounter was like a different mechanic, and then there was like a gimmick, and then the final boss was like everything combined.
yes, and I will secede to that argument, and I think we've talked about this before. Like I do agree.
Yeah, we probably have.
I think Pit of Heresy does that best.
Yeah, I like that formula more than here's the light and dark mode mechanic. Do that 17 times
Right,
until you're done, sort of
right,
thing. So, if I had to rank them, I would say Pit Heresy's number one. I'm gonna say Duality is number two
okay,
because I like the diversity of mechanics in that one. I think every encounter is at least a little different and interesting. It's
sure.
not perfect, but I enjoy that one. I am a sucker for the Leviathan stuff. I know a lot of people aren't, but
No,
for
that's fair.
me, the Leviathan stuff was like my first raid experience. So that whole aesthetic is always gonna be like nostalgic for me. So I'm sure that is part of my bias as to why I like that one second most. Then I would say Prophecy. I don't love it, but I honestly end up finding myself playing it a lot. As much as
Okay,
I hate like the hexahedron one and stuff, it is like it's kind of like a turn off your brain kind of dungeon. It's not
okay,
like aggressively like infuriating like some other encounters per se. Um, it's just kind of boring. And then I would say Shattered Throne because I just don't think it's aged well. I mean, for the first dungeon, it's good, but I just think the other ones have just improved and reiterated on that, that game mode better since the first one came out,
Sure.
and then I just don't really like Grasp at all.
Okay.
And as you know, I won't get into that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's glorified Gambit. I get it. Um,
I don't know. Where would you put Spire?
that final boss is frustrating to learn to me. So but it's also it's a quick dungeon. Like I feel like, especially between the first and second encounters, like you literally you're you go up, you open a window, and then you jump onto a platform, and you're at the second encounter. And like it's so like it just the pacing is so quick on it. But I enjoy it. I'm all I'm trying to separate like the loot that I've enjoyed getting from them versus the encounters themselves, and like some of
Sure.
them that I've played over and over again because I'm trying to get a certain thing. Um, I don't know. I probably would put Duality at the top now that I say that, because it's like that one is, as much as I didn't care for it, I didn't mind farming it as much as I did. Like doing like Kaido is kind of a cool fight, like in and of itself, and it goes pretty quick. The Galron fight that you do, the middle one's the only one that it just feels like no
I
matter,
agree. The middle
because
one's the weakest one.
yeah, because it's no matter how well you execute it, it still takes the same amount of time because you have to do all three of those, and you can't really expedite it any faster. I mean, yeah, you can kind of speed up certain parts of it, but it's still fundamentally taking you, two people have to go run and do that thing and come back and then dunk and you kill a boss and then you have to go do it again two more times. And like it just there's not much diversity in terms of it. I think Shattered Throne is up there with me because it like you said, it hasn't probably aged the best, but it's also the only one that doesn't feel like it's got some gimmick that you do all the way, and Pit of
Yeah.
Heresy to a certain degree. Like you said, it iterates instead of just like the same thing over and over again. Like Shattered Throne, you're doing different things throughout. Like the first is you're trying to find symbols around a giant map, and then the second thing is you're killing an enemy and getting orbs and then dunking them so you can damage them. And I guess you're kind of doing it at the end as well. But it's at that final boss is just so interesting where you're killing the giant three knights, and then Duel and Karu is kind of a cool design.
Hmm.
And
And
the
that's one of the
aesthetic,
ones where, like, if you're really good at it, you can like speed through it, so you feel
yes,
rewarded for being good at it.
yeah. And I did that solo this season. I That was the first dungeon I've ever soloed. I know like people have been soloing dungeons for years now, literally. But I finally was like, I want to see if I can do one on my own, and I was able to. I almost went flawless, and then I got booped off like right before the final boss, and I
Oh,
was like, that sucks. But it wouldn't have mattered because I died like 3 times at Duel and Karu because you can't plant a flag, and so I had no ammo. Uh, so I just like the first run, I was like trying to use primary to like burn down like the knights, because I was trying to preserve my heavy for the actual boss. So I died a couple times so I could actually get ammo. So but I was able to solo it, so I enjoyed it. So I have kind of some fun with that.
yeah.
I probably put Prophecy at the bottom because the Rainbow Road is just so
Yeah.
uninteresting to me,
Between
and the
that and the hexahedron, I really
yeah.
don't like that encounter either.
Yeah, and that like, if you're gonna make the argument of, like, Grasp is just glorified Gambit, like, so is that.
Oh,
Um,
totally. But that's
but
what made Grasp even worse, is because it came after Prophecy.
right.
It's like they already did this.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's the same thing. I guess, I mean, Grasp did it better in the sense that Prophecy, like you said, has some pretty jank mechanics with like the light and dark thing, and
Right.
that's, you know, can't count how many times I've like shot a knight and been like, "What? I thought that was so
Yeah.
and so," and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. So
Yeah. I will say the aesthetic is so bizarre and neat in Prophecy that I do have to give it props, like, the weird, like, sandy desert.
yeah, it's very cool looking.
Yeah, it definitely has, like, weird transitions and the weird, like, spiraling thing that always reminds me of the, Ocarina of Time dungeon where the hallway kinda spirals and spins, like, there's some cool stuff in there, and the music
Music's
hands down,
always
the
good.
music's probably one of the best in that one, uh,
I'd say
and
so.
it's like so there's elements of every single one of them that I'm not a fan of, and then there's other elements where I'm like either the weapon's cool or the aesthetic's cool. So it's like I don't mind doing them. I just if I'm gonna do kind of an event or an activity with the clan buddies at night, I there's almost every raid I would rather do um before I would prefer to do like prophecy or something. So
Sure. So I have another question for you.
sure.
One thing that I always like in raids and dungeons and stuff, one thing that's very cool about endgame activities, something that people don't always think about, is there's usually like a moment or two in there that's like a cool like spectacle moment that like the first time you played it or whatever, you're like, whoa, that's sick. Like in Grasp of Avarice, when you first get through the loot cave and you look out at the Cosmodrome or whatever, and the Traveler theme starts playing from Destiny 1. That was
Right.
mine for Grasp. Prophecy's got a couple moments, like you said, like the spinning Ocarina of Time hallway, and the maybe when you get to the Wasteland for the first time, or even when you come out to like the Rainbow Road section or whatever.
Sure.
Um, was there like a spectacle, like wow moment for you in Spire of the Watcher?
Trying to think if there's one for duality as well. I think there's that part kind of just before you get to Keitel where you step out and there's this big kind of open area inside the Leviathan, and it kind of reminds you of like how big and massive it is. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a cool. Um, I would say that that's probably that for that for me. Like I always like, oh yeah, God, the Leviathan's massive, and it just like it feels like you could take the entire game and just have it be the Leviathan in just different capacity in different areas, and it would never feel the same. I mean, it's all kind of like industrial equipment for the Cabal, but it's still just like cool. But for Spire, I like that when you start off, you're in Mars, and it's one of those kind of like time rift areas, and you see the Spire off in the distance, and you take the ramp all the way down. Although I hate those ramps because like F ever trying to do flawless runs for that because of the ramps and things like that. But um the exploration and that you get all the way to the top of the spire as like the middle encounter, and so you're kind of like, oh, is this the end? But then you realize like no, then you dive down into the spire into kind of the depths to do the final boss. So I think the exploration of the spire itself is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because it feels like this, like going back to, I mentioned that I think the game to me is the least interesting when it leans heavy into like the
When it
space,
what?
or I think the game to me is the least interesting or most uninteresting when it leans into the like space magic element, like when you go into like the hive city or like even like the
Oh,
dreadnought where it's like
okay.
I I I think like in contrast to I think the game is the most interesting when it's the kind of post-apocalyptic design, which like that's kind of the game that I like
The
what
whole
made
Golden
me
Age stuff.
yeah, what made me interested in the aesthetic of the game in the first place, which you get that a lot in D1.
Yes.
But then I mean, as soon as Taken King comes out, like obviously you get to the Dreadnought, and it goes into that kind of like hive aesthetic a lot more, where this whole thing feels almost fantastical and um of like fantasy almost.
Mhm.
Whereas like in you're like exploring the ruins of this cosmodrome, or you go to the moon, which is cool because it's science fiction, but then it's also like an abandoned base, and you find like crushed and dead like bodies all over the place. Or you go to Venus and you find out it's this old academy, but it's like all in shattered ruins, and all these aliens and monsters have kind of like taken it over. Like I think that's like I one of my favorite levels from D1 is the one where you go down into the vault in Venus, and like right when you open the door, there's those two skeletons, and it looks like they like strangled each other, and it's like what the hell happened here, like and to kind of compare that to, I think that's what's kind of cool about like Fallout. Like I like that video game series, and some of the coolest parts of that is when you explore the vaults. and you get all these kind of interesting backstories and all that stuff. And so like the and maybe that's my desire to enjoy the kind of the post-apocalyptic aesthetic. That's why I like Spire, because it's this giant like office building almost that's just like completely abandoned, and like it's like what was this place? I think when it leans into that is when the game is the most interesting to me, in contrast to like going to Savathun's
Throne World or like
throne world, where everything kind of looks like it's like
Dreaming
a,
City.
yeah, well, Dreaming City's cool because it's
Okay.
almost a perfect blend of the two. um and in a way, that's what I kind of also liked about the Tangled Shore, is because it had a little bit of this like, it's like cobbled together science fiction post-apocalyptic design, but it is a little bit of like magical fantasy as well. And so I think that's why Forsaken kind of blurred those lines beautifully, right? Like we talked about, it's like an old Western
Mhm.
revenge plot, also mixed with like space magic, and it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. And it you were literally kind of jumping between the two of them, so it works. Um, but I think Spire was really, really neat, because here's this like, there's like a rift in a time portal, and then this spire that wasn't there before is now accessible, and you have to go explore it. And yeah, it's kind of again going into that post-apocalyptic aesthetic, which I enjoy more, and that golden age technology stuff. So I really do enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I one thing I really liked about Spire the Watcher is just kind of like the concept of like I guess the structure of like progression in terms of like geographically where you're going. Like I like the
right,
idea that you climb the tower and everything. I think that's
right,
kind of a cool idea. Um and I've always liked the War Mind aesthetic as well. I'm
yes.
surprised that you don't like the space magic stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just that surprised me. I didn't know that.
Well, it's not okay. I guess maybe I misspoke. It's not that I don't like it. I I
If
guess
yeah, if you had to pick like one or the other.
Yeah, and I know I'm always like the D1 guy, but like what drew me into this franchise in the first place was the the golden age science fiction post-apocalyptic aesthetic, with elements of like, that's why I still think, I don't want to open this can of worms. Why I kind of like the concept of the original D1 vanilla story, where you're exploring these old ruins. There's this black heart portal that golden age scientists like found, and the cabal have found, and they don't know really what it is. And so it again, it kind of blurs that line, because like you're not on Mars, but you are on Mars, and it's in this weird like haunted evil garden where there's this heart, and like, but it all stemmed from these during the golden age, the scientists like found this technology, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And that's why I think Beyond Light has a really cool aesthetic, because you're going to this frozen wasteland, and you find out all these scientists were basically open this portal to bring all these Vex in, so that they could take them and study them and ultimately create the exos from them. Like, that's cool. Like that, taking a little bit of that fantasy space magic element, but then bringing it into like a tangible science fiction way, and then ultimately that leading to, there was this collapse, and that's why humanity has crumbled. So I think like when the game finds that perfect balance of all of those is when it's at its best. And when it's the least, that's why I want to say least interesting to me, is when it goes full on just like
One or the other sort
one
of
or the
thing?
other. Yeah. And even like when it leans way too hard into just, like, did a nuke go off here, or was there some cataclysmic event that we don't really know what happened? And I think again, when the game blurs all those lines is when it's at its best. And so yeah, going to Savathun's like throne world, where everything kind of looks like it's from Dark Souls. Like, it looks really pretty, but it's all like, it has this kind of fresh coat of paint. And it's like, I thought the whole point of Destiny was supposed to be like after all these horrible cataclysmic things happen, and that's why it kind of like, going to Earth and going to the EDZ was such a cool thing, like exploring these ruins and what happens after hundreds of years of decay, and when all these aliens have tried to like kind of take over, and you have to fight them back. Like, that's the most interesting to me.
Okay, yeah, that's perfectly valid. What did you think of like the story elements of Spire the Watcher, for lack of a better word? Because
Oh,
like I guess all the dungeons have like some sort of story,
right,
some more than others. Like
right,
Shattered Throne is literally like a plot point um within the whole Dreaming City
right.
storyline.
Well,
But
yeah, and I think well, to kind of go back, I think Dreaming City is also kind of a cool thing where it's like you have this kind of this temple from the Awoken or the city, and it's been taken, and you're kind of jumping between these dimensions, and it's like that's a cool, again, that kind of that cool blurred line where it's space magic-y, but it's also like here you're getting into the science fiction-y realm of this is some race of people that have been in a rift in space time, and it's kind of a neat, cool thing. So, Spire the Watcher, I'm a little weak on the story, um, but it's basically like after all of these time rifts keep happening, there's one that appears on Mars, and that Spire wasn't there before, and it's home to I don't remember the name of the. It's not a war mind, or is it a war mind?
or a
Um,
submind or something.
yeah, it's like a submind, and it was the one that was used for making like predictions on like it was like so advanced in terms of its like computation ability that it was able to like make like predictions about the future, and that was kind of like it was used for like defense. Um, and so it sounds like the Vex are trying to like steal it, and what it does to ultimately escape is it puts its consciousness into a bow that's nearby, and that's like the exotic that you can unlock at the end or get to drop. Is it's like a submind's conscience in the bow, and that's why it's got like an advanced targeting system that generates those rings or whatever. Like I haven't gotten it, but that's kind of from what I understand. So I think the kind of story elements behind it are kind of neat. And again, this is a perfect season for it, and it makes sense. Just like Duality, it makes sense that it was during Season of the Haunted with all the with the element, the ghost elements and shadows and
Oh,
shades and all that
Leviathan, of
stuff.
course.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah. I guess I mean anything with we kind of talked about this last episode. Anything with the Vex in terms of story is always gonna just be kind of boring to me.
yeah,
Um, like same thing with Garden of Salvation. I just feel like any activity involving the Vex,
yeah.
story wise, is always pretty surface level. And it doesn't always have to be like some super complex like plot like Shattered Throne. And I guess it's kind of fun to combine Warmind and Vex stuff because that's I think something that's traditionally not been done a whole lot in the
Right,
context of the story. I don't think Rasputin and the Vex really have had a whole lot of interaction.
right.
And I think it's been the Hive and the Cabal, I think most, if anything else. So yeah,
Well, probably the Fallen to some
and the
degree,
Fallen
right? Like,
I'm sure tried to rate it.
right.
Whatever the submind, I don't know. I get this stuff
Well,
confused.
I
But the
think that
one
was
on Earth,
yeah, yeah. I think that was a lot of kind of the original D1 story, right? Like, I think
yeah,
that's the story of the Warmind mission is you're going
Fallen
and like,
Saber as well.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like they're trying to get into the bunkers. So, yeah, I think every race except for the Vex have tried to
Except for
get
the
in
Vex,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, even like the Taken, the Hive, Cabal.
Which is
Um,
interesting,
yeah. One,
considering
it's
they're like the robot people.
Yeah, one, it's the specifically the group of Vex from the Black Garden that are trying to get in. Um,
Oh yes, that's right.
yeah, I don't know.
Someone smarter than me will know what that division is called because they're
Right.
all like different clans.
Yeah,
The
exactly. So yeah,
ones that worship the darkness.
exactly, exactly. So that's again kind of cool and that's why it works that they would look like the enemies from the Garden of Salvation raid. Uh, I think in terms of like a backdrop, I think the Black Garden is such a cool location.
I think so too.
Um, and I think as much as everyone kind of hates the Garden of Salvation raid, and I don't hate it, but I'm definitely up there in terms of like it's not my favorite. I think the aesthetic of the raid is really cool, and I still like that season that we during was Season of the Undying. I
Yeah,
like that 6-man activity where we got to go into the Black Garden and do something where it's just like okay, it's a cool locale. It's cool to kind of continue to kind of interconnect elements because it like when you do that, when you finally go to the Black Garden for the last mission of D1 vanilla and you see how massive it is and you explore just this tiny little section, and it does effectively make you feel small of like, what is this place? Why is it so massive? And it definitely kind of leaves you high and dry wanting to know more. And it sucks that it took how many years until we finally got to go back there. Although I guess you do in Taken King, there's like a mission or two where you go there. But anyway, but it's the same place. But like, so it's cool to go back. It's cool to kind of learn more about the high or the Vex that specifically inhabit there and what their motivations are. And but I know we talked about this, like you said, the Vex have always been kind of the weakest enemy in terms of like really presenting a looming threat, other than they're just this endless wave of robots that can travel through time, which I guess in terms of trying to be an ever-present threat, at least they have that effect where it's like kind of like the Hive always seem like they are going to be the end all be all final enemy, because it seems like just the design of their species is just like unending, and well, that's like in their name, right? They're just like a hive of nasty bugs and an infestation that you'll never completely get rid of. The Vex kind of have that same feeling where it's just like these endless wave of robots that'll never ever be stopped. And so it at least has a intimidation factor in that sense. But you are right in that there's not like a single mind that has the same kind of like mysteriousness as Savathun or Oryx. So
Yeah, I think it's cool also that they tie in like the Mars time rift from Witch Queen,
Mhm.
which is cool because it's nice to not like throw that away because that was kind of a important plot point,
Yes.
or like seemed like a pretty major thing to happen. So that was kind of cool that they brought that back and made it a relevant thing. Um, what do you think about the loot pool for this one?
So I've already voiced my opinions about the Cad Bane armor.
Sure, but I guess weapons specifically.
So I hate that two of the weapons are Seventh Seraph weapons, especially now that they've announced that they're gonna literally get rid of the Warbind Cell mods. So that's kind of
Whoa,
rendered.
whoa, wait, what? I didn't know that. Wait, when did they announce that?
That is part of one of the previews that they've come out with.
Oh
The
my gosh.
uh which one is it? It's the Build Crafting Evolved, I think. Loadout, mod customizations, and more from January 18th. Um, they basically they did that nerf a while back to Warmind cells, and no one's really done anything with them, so they're just getting get rid of them. Yeah,
Wow.
as an example of mods that aren't coming along for the ride are Warmind cells. These are the relic of a different time and already been nerfed in the past. They had a good run, but these mods will be depreciated and no longer available starting in season 20 to make way for new options to consider when crafting your preferred combat style.
What's
So,
the point? Like why get rid of them?
because they probably just looked at the numbers, and after they nerfed them, nobody was using them. And I think part of
But like
that
what's the
was
problem with just keeping it in the game though? Like
probably just size. Like so that you should read this article. It's pretty cool because they're talking about all the mod customization that's coming and how they're gonna get rid of elements to armor. Um and they're gonna kind of condense down like charged with light mods and elemental well mods. Like they're gonna kind of blend them together. They're gonna get rid of the requirement to have champion mods as like things you have to put on your arm. It's just once you unlock them in the artifact, they're going to be just always on. So if there's anti-barrier pulse, every time you put a pulse on, it's just going to have anti-barrier
it's so
built
nice
into it,
actually.
assuming you've unlocked uh that artifact slot.
That's nice. Yeah.
But they are going to go back to limiting how many artifact slots you can unlock, because obviously if you had all of them unlocked all the time, it would be kind of broken, especially the ones that they typically put like in the like the class item, where it's just like if you had access to all of those, it'd be pretty crazy. So they're balancing it out that way, but they're making it free to reset your artifact so that there's no like setback to it. So but yeah, read this because they show what the new like user interface is going to look like, and they kind of explain how the loadouts are going to work, the pre-made loadouts that you can save, uh, and just some of the other stuff that's going to go kind of into everything. So check it out. But yeah, so they're getting rid of Warmind cells. So that makes two of the weapons, the Seventh Seraph Carbine and Revolver, which nobody's using 180s. And so
Yeah.
because Warmind cells are going away, those two weapons in my mind are kind of worthless. And I know some people like target lock and auto rifles, blah blah blah. It's fine. I don't like those two weapons, and it sucks because they're in there kind of spoiling the loot pool. And I've literally gotten everything else except for the scout rifle, the long arm, and that's like the only thing that I want to get from there. And I've run the first encounter more times than I'd like to admit, because you can farm the first encounter pretty quickly if you've got two guys that know what you're doing. You can just each take a side while you kind of wrapping around the building and turn everything on really quickly. I have not gotten a long arm, and I've also done the final encounter more times than I'd like to admit. I've got the sidearms pretty cool. The liminal vigil, it's like Desperado for a sidearm is pretty neat. The LMG is kind of cool. I've gotten a couple welder flights, which is the grenade launcher that shoots like 2 grenades, which is kind of neat. But like the aesthetic on him is really cool. I like that we have some more legendary Tex Mechanica weapons, kind of like we got the shotgun during the 30th anniversary. So like the weapons aesthetic is pretty cool. Not a fan of the armor.
Okay, fair enough.
And I hate that 2 of the weapons in there are kind of the loot pool's diluted with 2 weapons that no one wants and are going to use. And they didn't even make them craftable like the Epicurean and fixed odds were in the duality dungeon. And that's another kind of complaint about that, is like they sort of like diluted that loot pool by adding 2 weapons that aesthetically don't make sense, and have no business being in the loot pool for that, because it doesn't match anything else, and then it just kind of also dilutes it. So I think that's a kind of a loss. But other than that, I think the rest of the weapons are really neat looking. I'd really like to get a long arm to have an opinion about it, because it looks cool, and it's like I like the lever action rifle design.
Yeah,
Obviously
I assume.
DMT's cool.
Is it one of those hip fire grip sort
Yeah,
of?
well, but and that's I haven't really toyed with the Tex Mechanica specific trait or origin trait, but I think it's like if you get shots from the hip, it makes your aim down sight shots more accurate, or like you reload faster, something like that. So it's kind of a DMT light ish,
Cool.
sort of, so to speak. And yeah, some people really like it. I have no opinion because I haven't gotten one yet, and I'd like to, and I'm kind of sick of farming it. So we'll see, maybe next season.
Yeah, I don't think I
But
have any of them, but
yeah,
they do look cool. I do like
yeah,
these kind of the combination between the Rasputin and the cowboy
yes,
aesthetic.
yep.
Do you like the Tex Mechanica weapon aesthetic?
Uh, on some things, like I'm not good with the last word, but I really like the way it looks.
Mm-hmm.
DMT's cool, is kind of the Henry repeater lever action style.
Yep.
Um, there's also Huckleberry, which is okay. They all look cool. The only one that I think is like just a total like what bizarre out is the heavy grenade launcher that I can't even think of the name of. And no one ever remembers that that's a Tex Mechanical weapon. Um,
Oh, why can't I think of it?
because no one uses it.
You
I don't even have it in dim because I probably dismantled it.
said it's an exotic.
Yeah. Uh, it's from
What does
year
it do?
one. It
Oh, the prospector.
The Prospector. Yeah,
Oh
there
my
you go.
gosh! Wow, I forgot
That
that
lets you know.
existed.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course the chaperone is like such a cool, like, again the lever action aesthetic I think is the coolest. I know chaperone has a lot of hate from a lot of folks, but just in terms of like, again, kind of bizarre, neat Western science fiction-y bizarre stuff. I always think the Tex Mechanica aesthetic is really cool on weapons. Now that we've finally seen it in armor, it just, yeah, the yeehaw stuff is a little goofy in my
Yeah,
mind.
I get.
Um, and I think like the last word is always like the last word is so embedded in the like DNA of like Destiny's lore, in stark contrast to Thorn, and I think that's why there's such a
Yes.
cool like kind of contrast to each other. And even with Lumina now being like kind of this weird blend of that edition as well, in those terms of those like exotics. Um, and I think the last word sort of being this old like cowboy 6-shooter or 8-shooter in this case that you fire from the hip and do like the quick with the hammer. Such a cool aesthetic for this game, and it's so like I've been saying the word aesthetic a lot. And I think that's like the theme of this episode. I think it's badass and awesome, and I think some of the other weapons that they made have been really cool. And it's neat to see kind of just more designs of that manifest in terms of like a grenade launcher and a sidearm, and they all look cool. And they're all fun to use. The LMG is pretty rad too.
Yeah. So, off-topic question, but I
Sure.
realized we didn't talk about this yet. Has Revision Zero been keeping you occupied over the course of the season?
Yes, I'm actually glad that you brought that up. I am in love with the Revision Zero. I've already put like 2,000 kills on it and leveled it up because I've been using it a lot in the heist battlegrounds, and just like I kind of got on a kick and I did the Seraph Shield mission. Like I did like a solo legendary run flawless. And I use that a bunch because it's just useful, because it's got good range and decent damage, and it's fun to fire up. And I love the getting a bunch of headshots gives it like 4 sniper shots, and it's really cool. And I love that like week by week you've been unlocking like different catalysts for it, and it's just fun to use. And like each week like it gets a better version of like the hunter's trance, and all the stats just get a little bit better each time. Like I think it's such a cool exotic and feels so unique, and it's been really fun to craft. And I like every time you get one of the new trances, it also changes the actual look. Going back to aesthetic, it changes the aesthetic of the gun, where it gets like the undermount and like the side thing, and just slightly it gives it a longer barrel, and it's so ridiculously long that it's like off the screen. I've been really digging it, and it's one of the cooler exotics I think we've gotten in a long time. It's fun to use in PvE. I've used it in PvP. I've gotten a couple like headshots with it with the sniper, and that felt really satisfying to do in PvP. So I really like it. I think it's a cool pulse rifle, and I'm glad that it's like a part of like the arsenal now.
Yeah. The whole customization aspect I think is
Yes.
very, very neat. So that's cool. What do you think of the mission, by the way?
I am assuming that it's going to go away at the end of the season, and I'm bummed out about it because it, as everyone in my clan calls it, it's like kind of a Deepstone Crypt light, where it teaches you a little bit
Yep.
about the mechanics.
Yep.
I think the spacewalk part is pretty cool. I really like that it's the backdrop of it is Earth, and you can see the Traveler. Cool skybox. I like the mission itself. Like I really like the part where you surrender weapons, and the hive or the fallen let you on their catch, and then you immediately just transmit the weapons back and then like kill them all. Um,
Brutal. That's a war crime, probably.
it kind of is, but like it's a cool mission. The I like the I think my favorite part of it is probably just before that kind of first mini boss encounter where you take him down to like that hive guy down to like a third health, and then um the 3, what are those called? The big fallen tank things. I'm blanking on the name right now.
Which, the walkers?
The walkers, yeah. I can't even think of what they're called. But like there's 3 of them that appear in that room, and it's pretty hectic and crazy. Like it's a fun fight that's not just a boss with health. But you actually have to like prioritize who you target, and kind of like management of like the marauders will try to sneak up behind you, and so you have to kind of always be paying attention. Like doing it solo was actually a lot of fun. And felt very rewarding, and I've been enjoying it. Like I am not annoyed that they want you to play it so many times, because it like it gets repetitive, and you know what to do after like the 3rd or 4th time. But it's challenging enough and interesting enough that I've enjoyed it, and I'll be sad to see it go if it leaves. And I went through the effort to unlock the robot dog, and I hope that he stays in the helm, because that was like definitely the best part of it. And every time I go to the helm, I make sure to point to pet him.
Oh, that's
and it's
so
awesome.
cute.
The execute good boy protocol or whatever.
That's adorable.
And then the best was that the TWAB that came out after that came out, and they showed the the proof of concept, and they have you petting like a guardian, because they were just basically showing that at any angle you could like execute the emote basically to pet the dog. But before they had the dog created, they just have like a guardian on its hands and knees, and so you're like petting a guardian, and people are like, this is like nightmare fuel. So it's awesome.
That's so fun.
I think it's really cool. It's a fun mission. Again, it's kind of like, it's a clever way to reuse some Deepstone Crypt assets and the cool space station walk, and again, science fiction part of it. I love. Really cool. This big kind of abandoned empty space station that are inhabited by aliens, and it's rad. I think it's good.
Well, that's about all the time we have today for this discussion, but thank you, Rob, for hopping on and chatting with me as always, and thank you guys for listening to our little discussion of Spire the Watcher and a little bit about Revision Zero. Tune in next time, where we are going to be talking about the state of Nightfall and the state of the game and stuff like that. So thank you guys again, and we'll see you next time.
You can put this voice recording away and go on with your life, because you and I both know you'd have me yapping in your ear for the rest of your days.
Want to further the discussion? Get in touch with us at any of our Twitter handles, all of which can be found at our podcast description.